Good. Good to go. I hope everyone can hear me. If you can't hear me well, just be sure to let us know. Thank you for signing up and attending the webinar. Just to kind of give you a general idea of what we'll do, we've got 10 topics, so we're going to be really brief, really to the point on a few things. And I think what we'd like to do is try to cover those topics. We already have some questions that have been emailed in. Once we get to the end of the topics, we'll start addressing those questions and then allow more questions that may come up. One good thing I did ask Josh a few minutes ago, this is not a, quote, 30-minute limit. And we'll be glad to answer questions and do things as long as you guys have time. Just to kind of give a way of introduction, I'm Gary James. I'm the senior advisor in the Meridian, Mississippi office with Summit, and then Nathan Archuleta, or Nate as we call him, is an advisor in the Colorado Springs office. So you will immediately notice that we sound different. You will not mistake me for somebody who lived in New York City most of their life. So maybe that'll make it at least a little more interesting at times. So what we'd like to do is kind of jump into the actual presentation. And we're going to let Nate start off first and talk about managing risk. So Nate, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thanks, Gary. One quick reminder, if you guys do have some questions that you want to submit to us, if we can get to them today, email us at info@summitwealthgroup.com. And Josh will receive those emails and pass them off to Gary and I here. We'll do our best to try and get to every question that we can today. And certainly, we're always here. If you have a relationship with another advisor at Summit, please feel free to reach out, engage them with other questions that this might bring up or things that we might not have time to get to today. So let's kind of jump off here on risk management. So there's risk in life, whatever we do. It's a balancing act, number one. When it comes to goals that we want to strive for, managing risk, I think, always begins with having an emergency fund. I'm a big Dave Ramsey fan. I think a lot of us are big Dave Ramsey fans. And he talks about inviting Murphy into your home, Murphy's Law. And the best thing to do is to plan 3 to 6 months worth of expenses that is strictly for emergencies. And when I say emergencies, that's something that you cannot predict, that you're not planning. If you got an expense coming up or something's going to happen where you spend that money, not emergency. This is just kind of the rainy day fund. Managing risk also means diversifying your portfolio. So we don't want to bet everything on one horse. We got to have a lot of different horses in the race. And diversification allows us to spread out risk and to capture the best risk and reward, kind of the trade-off between those two, as I like to describe it. We also think about risk as insurance risk or passing risk off to other entities or other places. So I always start at the very top with life insurance. And I believe term life insurance is going to be the best bang for your buck to cover those catastrophic risks. From there, we want to look at disability. Statistically, I think they say that 25% of people will experience a disability before age 67. Now, 25% of people might not be much, but if we're part of that 25%, it could be a life-changing event. And so disability insurance is often covered through a group and our employers and such. I think it's always wise to consider having a private policy that's going to coordinate with employer policies. That way, whenever you change jobs and things, you're going to be covered and you're going to know that you're okay if there is ever an event like that. The last bit of managing risk that I think comes up a lot when we're talking about financial planning and just building wealth and accumulating wealth is looking at umbrella insurance. Umbrella insurance could be a good supplement to provide exactly that, an umbrella over your big picture financial situation for circumstances that might be your fault, essentially. So managing risk covers a lot of different areas, but insurance, always have an emergency fund and always diversify.
I'm going to tackle next the topic of paying off debt. And we broke it down into two pieces because they're very different. One is consumer debt, think credit cards, auto loans, those types of things. And the second piece, again, is paying off the house. So let's tackle the consumer debt first. As you probably would not be surprised, I'm not a real big fan of consumer debt to begin with. Certainly credit cards, we see a lot of people who are, they struggle to ever really pay down their credit card balances simply because the rates are so high. It's difficult to do that. Credit card companies know that, and they're very good at enticing you to spend money to do that. An excellent example is I recently bought some flooring for a rental property that we were redoing. Well, through lumber liquidators, they would give you a huge discount if you would put it on their credit card. And so if you paid it off within 2 years, no interest. Well, let me tell you what they're banking on, which they're not going to be successful with me, but they are with a lot of people. They're banking on what? At 2 years, it won't be paid off. And then guess what? The interest rate's astronomical. So be very careful with credit card debt, period. I generally say make sure you pay it off month to month if you do use it. Auto loans, again, same thing. Rates tend to be a little high. Generally, you don't want to be paying interest on a depreciating asset, which unfortunately most vehicles are. And another question that's come up with auto loans recently is so many times now with rates where they are, I know if you go to a Ford dealership right now, you can get 84 months, 0 interest, which is unbelievable if you think about it. So I'm not saying there would never be an exception. You have to ask the question, why give up my money if I can borrow from them for nothing? But even if you do that, I do like having the ability to have money somewhere to pay it off if you need to. So don't get sucked into a situation where you have a lot of consumer debt and monthly notes eat you up. Have the ability on consumer debt if possible, pay it off. Paying off a house, again, 20 years ago, no brainer, you got to pay extra every month. I've had 2 clients recently, one refinanced 30 years at 2.75. I think another was 15 at 2.5. It gets a little harder at those rates because you almost are getting money for free. It's almost scary, really, when you think about what the long-term result's going to be of some of this stuff. But yeah, in general, especially if you're getting close to retirement, I don't like seeing a mortgage note in retirement because it tends to be a big chunk of monthly income. But if you do have a really low rate, feel like, well, I'm making more money on my investments, which you probably are, even after taxes. I don't have any real issue with not paying it off, but certainly, again, you need to have the money there if you need to. And we've got a question actually that's been submitted that will address that a little bit more specifically in the question and answer section. Okay. Nate, you just want to go down the list? You want me to go ahead and hit short-term goals, or you want to let's flip-flop to one of yours?
That sounds good. Let's talk about, I kind of think of it as college, but maybe that's the wrong word to use. Maybe more of education planning. College isn't necessary, and I think there's a lot of perspective around it, that there's a lot of paths in life that we can certainly be successful with that wouldn't involve college. But education itself, I think, is important. There have been some recent developments and changes in the laws around education savings, and this primarily affects 529 accounts. So when we think of education savings, we want to have flexibility. We want to establish a goal around that and invest specifically towards that, help our money work towards that specific goal. And also sometimes create a value around that for our children to work and say, okay, we have some money set aside, but it is specifically for you and your professional education or your future, really. There are some tax advantages to that. That's the nice thing with 529 accounts, is that they grow tax-free, but there are some restrictions to that. Think about taxability and tax advantage versus freedom to use the assets. There are some pretty significant changes, like I mentioned, that I think we should all be aware of. Is number one, 529s have now added expenses for apprenticeships. So let's say you want to be a plumber or electrician, or your child does. You can still save in a 529 if they don't go a 4-year college route. You can still use those assets now for these other type of employment opportunities. 529 assets can also be used for trade school, really any accredited institution, and qualified higher education expenses. If you prefer to have the money under a little bit more control, there are options to invest yourself in just a taxable investment account. And you can use that money for other goals, but also earmark it to say we're going to help the kids when and if they need some help with tuition or any expenses for education. In that case, you would just gift the money from yourselves. And then there are also things like UTMA accounts, Uniform Transfers to Minors. And that's what we use in Colorado as a UTMA. And that is actually your child's account. So the thing to be aware with that is as your child hits 18 or 21, that money becomes theirs, regardless of the situation that they're in. So there are some important things to think about education, but planning for the future and just saving a few dollars here and there. Think about the diaper fund as your kids get older and older. If you start to funnel that towards education, that's a good way to chip away and allow you to have more options down the road. One other important thing I want to mention about education savings, and this is a rather new development over the past couple of years, is what's called the ABLE account, a 529 ABLE account. And ABLE, ABLE stands for Achieving a Better Life Experience. And this account has been created to allow for individuals with disabilities or special needs to defer assets in a tax-advantaged manner, like a college 529 account, and also keep that money away from some of the rules associated with their Medicaid benefits and other benefits that they may receive. And there's a wide variety of expenses that they can use that money for, but I have several clients where their children may have some disabilities, but they're able to work. They're not spending all of the money that they're bringing in, but they don't want to damage their Medicaid benefits. And so the ABLE account can be a great solution there.
All right, next we'll hit, this will be pretty brief, saving for short-term goals, new car, travel, whatever it happens to be. I'm a huge fan, because it is so easy to do these days, of what I call the auto draft. Kind of you pay yourself and you never know it. So let's just say we're saving for a car. We want to buy, 2 years from now, we want to have $20,000 in cash for a car. We're going to have maybe a trade-in to go with it. Simply go ahead and draft enough money out of your checking account every month to pay for that in a separate account, and you never tend to miss it. My experience has been, if you think, well, every month I'm going to write a check for vacation or for car to save, guess what happens every month? What Nate mentioned earlier, there's always some kind of surprise. And sometimes we can actually make up our own surprises to spend money on. So I really think a great way to do that is to have a designated account for those types of expenses, and simply, once your paycheck hits, your business income hits, whatever it happens to be, go ahead and draft it out, and you tend to never miss it. And so I like that. I also like the idea, if you do have a month where, if you're a business owner and you happen to have a really good month and you've got an extra $2,000 or $5,000 or whatever you can put toward it, you can always add to it. But that systematic approach tends to be something more people will follow, and it just kind of almost instills that discipline there without you having to think about it. So, all right, Nate.
Thanks, Gary. Well, that concept of paying yourself, I think, applies in a lot of situations, and specifically retirement. That's always one of our big conversations with clients, and for all of us, retirement might mean something totally different. And for some of the younger generation, that concept of retirement is changing. So I think we're now adopting this concept of a work optional phase of life. And the most important thing that I would like everybody to remember about this work optional phase of life is determining purpose with that new chapter. We want to retire to something, not from something. And I think that's a mentality. And when we make that transition, there's a lot of weight that comes with it. We have to now fill our days. We're used to getting up, making our coffee, and driving to work, and spending a day at the office or wherever we're at. And now that totally changes. So really thinking about that. It might be a little bit easier as we're closer to retirement to start to visualize how we're going to plan out our days. And so for those of us that are a little bit further away, I think we want to conceptualize those hopes and dreams, the things that we love, those passions. And so again, I always come back to purpose when it comes to retirement. What are the things that you love, the ways that you love to spend your time, the people that you love to be with? And that's really how we create the vision for retirement. Once we understand all of that, we can engineer all those numbers and work together to help you understand what those targets and what those goals are to kind of make those things happen.
All right, next we will tackle something that's kind of near and dear to my heart, estate planning. And I'm going to tell you why it's near and dear to my heart. Typically, especially if you've got a married couple, typically one of the other spouse's strengths tends to be handling the finances, doing those kind of things. We very seldom see, one spouse is 50%, the other spouse is 50% of that. Usually one of the other tends to be what they're good at and what they enjoy doing, so they tend to do it, which can be a great thing. However, if you don't properly plan your estate, when the spouse passes away, if they predecease the other spouse, if the spouse is really fluent in the financial side, in the wills, those kind of things, passes away first, it can be a nightmare for the other spouse. I tell people all the time, it's bad enough to lose a loved one. It's worse to be trying to grieve and deal with a ton of administrative stuff on top of that. So I would say your basics in estate planning, and it could be, this is a really big area, but at the very least, you need wills for each other. When we say wills, people tend to think, well, we want things to pass through our wills. No, we really don't. Will's really a catch-all for something we may have missed. What we really want to do is try to make it where our assets pass to our heirs without going through our will, because anything that goes through your will be probated. Probate is a time-consuming process, and depending on what state you live in, it can be an expensive process. But you're looking at a minimum of 6 to 9 months just to probate a very basic will, nothing fancy. So what you really want to do for estate planning, one, is make sure all your beneficiary designations on IRAs, life insurance policies, whatever it happens to be, are correct. So that if you've not reviewed those in a few years, you need to go review those immediately, because that's a huge part of estate planning, is setting up the beneficiaries correctly. Anything else you've got, like if you looked at a lot of our clients that are older, particularly, their home and hard assets, such as land and property, are in things like deeds with life estates, which basically means they've already given that asset away to heirs, but they maintain the right to live in it, use it as long as they're alive. When they pass away, it's already been given away. It's as simple go down to the courthouse and change the deed. So there's a lot of things around those areas you can make to simplify your life. Second thing you need for sure is a power of attorney. Will and beneficiary designations go into operation when you pass away. A power of attorney actually helps you while you're alive. Classic example, just say I had a stroke tomorrow and was not functional for 3 months. Somebody needs to be able to step in and help with paying the bills, managing the household, those kinds of things that I tend to do. And in my case, that's my spouse. She has a power of attorney for me, which means if she needed money out of a retirement account, or she needed money out of a checking account that just was in my name, she has the capability to do that without a whole lot of headache. So wills, powers of attorney. Last thing is different terminology in different states. In Mississippi, it's called a healthcare directive. Some places it's called a medical power of attorney. But it's just this document that says if I reach the end of my life and I'm in a vegetative state or something like that, what do I want you to do? Do I want you to leave the respirator on, continue to breathe for me? Or if 3 or 4 doctors say there's no way I'm coming back, do I want that just cut off? That's a huge thing for your family emotionally. Don't make your family do that without knowing what your wishes are. It's just such a comfort to know when you get in that situation. And I had that situation with a sister of mine. I had a sister who passed away when she was 52. She had done nothing for estate planning. when she went to a critical care unit, her 30-year-old daughter walked in. The first thing they asked was, who makes decisions? That is not a good question for a 30-year-old daughter whose mom's had a stroke. So I'm just saying, make sure if you possibly can, that you can get that healthcare directive, medical power of attorney, whatever it happens to be called in your state, in place emotionally as well as practically. It will save your family a lot of time. And again, we can stay on this topic for hours and hours, but that's about where I better stop right now.
Well, I'll add to that, because I think another goal to strive for is leaving a legacy. And leaving a legacy is much more, and should be much more than just the dollars and cents that we leave on this earth that we've accumulated. A legacy is more centered around the principles and values that we've developed in our own lives, that we take from our family tree and that we want to continue to pass down through the family tree. Read an interesting article just this morning, actually, about the Vanderbilt family, and a story about the massive amount of wealth that they accumulated and how within a few generations it was squandered away in some circumstances. And that's very typical. By the third generation, the great-grandchildren, we tend to see a financial legacy dissolve, even if it was a massive amount of wealth, because a legacy, again, is centered around principles and values. And so having conversations with your children, teaching them about money, but teaching them about what you find to be close and near and dear to your heart, and then fostering that with them as then they have children and you have grandchildren, continuing that conversation. I think leaving a legacy, again, the important thing, just like retirement, we think about purpose. Leaving a legacy, we want to think about our principles and values and how that's really going to affect the world after we're gone.
All right, next we'll talk about charitable giving, really just three topics really quickly on charitable giving. One, for those of you who are at your required minimum distribution age, which recently got bumped up to 72 with this last CARES Act that Congress passed. But if you're already having a draw, if you were drawing at 70 and a half under the old rules before that happened, if you are inclined to make charitable contributions to your church, to your synagogue, to whoever, United Way, whoever it may be, it is a no-brainer to do that directly with your R&D. And two big reasons there. One, you can make that check directly payable to the organization. That money will not show up as taxable income on your tax return. That's become more important since they made the standard deduction larger. Fewer clients now can itemize. You used to could take advantage of some of your charitable distributions if you could itemize. Well, fewer people can itemize now. So if you're making consistent charitable distributions to any kind of organization, using that required minimum distribution to me is just a no-brainer. Second thing I would say is you obviously, if you do have a little bit more significant amount of wealth and may really have some longer-term charitable aspirations, you can set up a charitable remainder trust that will provide income during your lifetime, and also will then leave the principal or corpus of that trust to the organization you choose to benefit. So another option is looking at charitable remainder trust. Last thing I would say is many times people will say, well, I don't have that much. I don't want to spend the money to do a charitable remainder trust with an estate planning attorney because they're not cheap. But you can do what's called a donor advised fund. Many mutual fund companies have what's called a donor advised fund. Basically a way for you to kind of piggyback in with a lot of other investors in a mutual fund type setup. You can choose the investments, the funds, just like you would in any other account. And you also get to choose the charity. So what happens is basically you get your own little private charitable remainder trust in a way, but without having to go to that expense. I've seen people, especially when you're talking, smaller amounts of money, $50,000, $10,000, use that as a way to fulfill some charitable wishes that they have. And it's a very inexpensive and efficient way to do so.
Well, I'll change gears completely and talk about a little more self-centered type of a goal that, I personally have always thought about at some point in my life, I would like to have a little cabin in the woods where I can walk outside and see the fresh dew on the trees in the mountains and be totally isolated. And I know many of us, especially in this world we live in with cable TV and internet and all that, we see House Hunters International, we see all the beach houses, we see all these home improvement shows and things. But the concept of a dream house is something that is fairly common in discussions with clients. And it might mean a lot of things to a lot of different folks, including paying off the home that you're in. Maybe we love exactly where we're at in the house that we're in, but having that mortgage free and clear is something that is a dream of ours, our dream home, really. The dream house, I think, is something to strive for, but we want to make sure that we think about our financial plan as needs, wants, and wishes. So what do we need? What do we want? What do we wish for? How do we prioritize those things? The dream house might be much more important because it's a change in lifestyle, it's a change in activity, it might be a change in location, a change in states or something like that. And I think as with any long-term financial goal, the dream house is something that we want to start thinking about early on. How are we going to take steps to make that become a reality? How do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time, right? So do we start saving now? Do we pay off our home and snowball that home into another property in the future? Those are all important considerations and are very unique to you and your circumstance. But the dream home, I think, is when we sit down and think about what we want for our future, what are those goals that we should just kind of get crazy with? Let's think about it. Let's say something that's way out there. Think if it's achievable, then kind of work backwards and take some of those steps to say, okay, well, maybe how can we make that a reality?
All right, and I think Nate gave me this last topic on purpose because most people don't like to talk about it or think about it. Live on less than you earn or budget. You know, just the word budget sounds kind of bad, doesn't it? Two big observations there, and these are general observations, there are exceptions. But one is, I've encountered very few people who will live on a detailed budget. They just don't like the idea of saying my grocery bill should be this much every month and I'm going to stick to it no matter what. If you are that person, that's great. Set down a detailed budget, break out the expense items. There's lots of services that we can provide you a list of expenses that you might consider as part of your budget, those kinds of things. We can provide you with percentages that are recommended for each area of the budget, those types of things. However, if you're that person that does not want to be that detailed, a great way you can do it, and this kind of gets back to what I mentioned about being able to draft accounts so easily now, you know, basically say, I want to give, if you're charitably inclined, maybe you say you want to give 10% of your income, maybe you want to save 10 to 15% of it for retirement. Maybe you want to save another 10% for those items we mentioned earlier, like a vehicle purchase at some point or a vacation, whatever it happens to be. Go ahead and draft it out of your account. Take it out of your account. That way, if you're taking those things out of your account, guess what you do? You live on the rest of it. Whether it's groceries, or it's, rent, utilities, whatever it happens to be. But at the very least, set up those percentages and draft it out. If you won't keep a detailed budget, at least do that. And again, we live in an age today where that type of stuff is just easier because it's really easy to set up transfers between accounts now and just, hey, my paycheck or my business income hits and X number of dollars is just gone. I just don't have access to it anymore. And then live on the remainder. So I think we're ready now for questions. We had some earlier questions that were sent in. I think we'll tackle those first. Nate, do you want to tackle the first two that have to do with the election, or do you want me to do that?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and discuss that. And this is nice. We can tackle a few of these questions together. Now, I'll read you a quote here. This is it. This is the end of everything. By H.L. Mencken, the sage of Baltimore, on the morning of November 3rd, 1948, reacting to the election of Harry Truman. So way back then, we were hearing the same type of things that we hear today. And I think there's a lot of noise surrounding that. There does not seem to be any meaningful correlation between who the president is and the economy. And if we really think a little bit more in depth, no president, really no government can force a business, let alone 500 businesses in an S&P index, to lose money consistently for a long period of time. Business finds a way. Their motivation is to be successful and be profitable. And businesses really are just people like you and I out there driven towards success. And so whatever happens with taxation, whatever happens with political perspective and things like that, business will continue to operate under the environment in order to maximize their potential profits, their potential growth, whatever their motivation might be. I think that if we mix our politics with our political decisions, we enter some unsteady ground because it is beyond our control. And to be successful as an investor, the dominant determinant of success in building wealth is our behavior, not those external factors like who's president, interest rates, elections, all those types of things. It's really what we do and the habits and the behaviors that we have that are going to determine the success. Now, there may be some reactionary period up or down, and I think that happens regardless. We see markets go up, markets go down. There's nothing new under the sun associated with market cycles and ups and downs and things like that. So the important thing is to know your plan, stick to it, reduce or eliminate that noise, and just focus on your long-term goals. Play the long game with that. And history has shown that we can pretty much be successful through that.
Nate, that was great, but you just totally avoided all the juicy stuff they wanted to hear about this. Although what you said is exactly true. Only points I would have about elections in general: one, markets don't like uncertainty, and this plays back into exactly what Nate said. Companies are going to adapt once they know the environment. So having volatility around an election year, especially a presidential election year, is not atypical. That's pretty typical. So that's the first thing. Once, whether it's Biden, whether it's Trump, whoever, once they know who's there and kind of where the things are going, they'll adjust, they'll adapt. Second thing is, if you look back for the last 80 years or so, there's really no statistical evidence that says we're better off from a market perspective with a Democrat or Republican. You just can't get any feel for that. We've seen Republicans that be great, we've seen Democrats that be great, we've seen both of them that not be so great. The big question we get in my area of the country, I think more than anything else, is what happens if Trump is out and Biden's in, because Biden is the unknown, obviously, at this point. I will tell you two things, and this is strictly an economic analysis, okay? Will taxes go back up to probably what they were in the Obama years? Yeah, they probably will. Will that be a drag on the economy and on companies? Yeah, it will to some degree. But also, the tariff situation, the relations with some of these other countries that we're dealing with, China being the primary country there, will actually get better from a business perspective. Now, whether you think doing China long-term is good, bad, or indifferent, I don't know. But the S&P 500 will like these things being relaxed because they make a lot of money dealing with China. So I would tell you, will there be some negatives if Biden wins? Yes. But will there also be some economic positives if Biden wins? Yes. So, I think there will be kind of a wash there. And back to Nate's point, large companies have smart people figuring out what do we need to do to make money no matter what environment we're in, and that's what they're going to try to do ultimately. So, Nate, do you want to take the one about the IRA funds? You want me to comment on it? What do you think?
Well, I'll just highlight something you said earlier, Gary. So the question is, if I don't need my IRA funds to live on, why should I withdraw any other than to comply with federal laws after a certain age? So the required minimum distribution, which is now 72, as Gary mentioned. I think the biggest thing that Gary pointed out earlier is qualified charitable distributions. If you are charitably minded, funnel the distributions through your IRA. Save money on taxes. It totally avoids the tax toll booth and might not change your cash flow at all, but you're able to give, which I think is such an important thing. There have been some laws and changes to inheritance in IRAs. So if you don't need them to live on and don't need to spend them, I think number one, you should give yourself some permission to spend as you saved and accumulated and enjoy some of that. But if your intention is to pass it down your family tree, there's nothing wrong with that. You can just leave it in there and let it accumulate, continue to grow and compound with your investments, and then pass it down to the next generation. But there will be some estate planning involved in that. So what has happened recently is that we could previously stretch out the IRA for our beneficiary, meaning that your beneficiary could take a required minimum distribution, just a small amount of that, and stretch it out over their lifetime, or until they retire and they want to spend more and such and such. But that has now been changed with some recent legislation, and a beneficiary has to take that money out of the IRA within 10 years now. And so now it increases some complexity with estate planning and managing all of that. The faster you spend it, the more you're going to pay in taxes because you're taking out larger sums at one point in time. So I think other than to enjoy it or to live off of it if necessary, that's really the big reason. Otherwise, feel free to pass that down as part of your legacy and part of your estate plan. But make sure that you take some time to work through those two things. So we talked about what we did, your purpose and your values, and making sure that you're saving money by planning early on with a qualified estate planning attorney and a financial planner too.
Only comment I'd have on that is, one, you still can, keep in mind, you still can pass to your spouse and stretch it over their lifetime. They can do that. But anybody other than a spouse beneficiary now basically has to have the money out in 10 years. So that does complicate some estate planning. The other thing I would say don't forget about Roth IRA conversions. That is a much better vehicle for your family to inherit from a tax perspective than your traditional IRA. And I think one thing's almost for certain. Used to we only did Roth conversions from people in really low tax brackets because, let's face it, when you pull the money out of the IRA, the traditional IRA, convert it to a Roth, you are taxed on it that year. But what happens is, especially these longer lifespans we're seeing with people now, the longer that money can grow tax-free now in that Roth, at some point you pass a break-even point where you're better off paying the tax now and putting in the Roth. The big unknown there on those calculations is the future tax rate. Okay? You don't know for sure what the tax rate will be 15 years down the road, 20 years down the road when you're pulling that money out. So that makes it a little harder of a computation, so to speak. However, if I ask this question to everybody here, I think I already know what the majority answer would be. Do you really think tax rates will be higher or lower 15 years from now? Everybody thinks they're going up. I mean, with the debt we've accumulated and a lot of other things going on in our economy, tax rates over the next 10, 15, 20 years are almost certainly going up. That makes the Roth conversion now even more attractive, because when you're pulling money out 20 years from now, if tax rates are higher, you're paying tax on it at that higher rate out of the traditional. Out of the Roth, you're not. So I just don't forget about Roth conversions. If you've got an IRA you don't need, especially if you're really concerned about getting this to your heirs in the most tax efficient manner. So. You want to tackle cryptocurrency?
I'll offer some thoughts on it. I haven't heard much about it this year from clients, actually, cryptocurrency, but it's there in the background. And cryptocurrency is still a little cumbersome when you compare it to other mediums of exchange like Google Pay and things like that, but it's certainly gaining popularity. I think cryptocurrency as an investment is still just pure speculation. We've seen some primary players continue to grow and have these ridiculous swings in prices and such. And we've seen other players enter the market go boom or bust all within a couple of months sometimes, and then disappear completely. The big effect that cryptocurrency will have is the blockchain technology. And so blockchain technology could be part of the economy of the future. What a lot of large financial institutions and intermediaries are looking at is how does that blockchain technology start to affect their processing, their systems, and things like that? How can they take advantage of it? We have not seen a large-scale adaptation or inclusion of blockchain technology yet, but there's a lot of optimism around it, I think. So I think that's the main thing about cryptocurrency. Speculative investments, there's really no get-rich-quick scheme. There's a lot of risk involved with it. But the technology behind cryptocurrency can be an important factor in the economy of the future. It's just going to be a slow development. It has to be implemented, embraced, tested. We have to see how it works in good situations and in bad situations. So I think it'll be a slow adaptation to that. But that's probably the story to remember is the blockchain technology.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, what I tell people right now about cryptocurrency investing is if you can afford to lose it, do it. Doesn't mean you will lose it. You may make a killing. Some people have. But you don't need to go into that water unless it's money you can afford to drown with. Because, again, I think Nate's right. Eventually that technology will come along. But it reminds me a little bit of the internet buzz back in the late 90s, early 2000s, when everybody thought brick and mortar stores were going away forever, and all this new technology, which was true. We did have all that, but having the technology and being able to make money off the technology are two very different things. So again, no issue with people that can afford to be a little riskier with their money doing something like that, but just be sure that if it does go away, you're not risking your retirement income or something like that to do it. So. Go ahead, Nate. You want to start on the next one?
Well, this question is, if we do not have a value tied to our investment goals, how should we establish that value? This is a good question. Now, we see this Fidelity commercial and say, what is your number? And we try and visualize and picture those things. It's totally subjective. It totally depends on your circumstances, the life that you want to live in that work optional phase of life, and the things that you want to do. So that's where we start. It's starting to visualize what that work optional phase or what that goal is for you. What are the things that you love, the people and the passions that you want to spend time with? And what are the kind of resources that it's going to take, or is it going to take for you to enjoy those things and really develop contentment, So contentment is what I think all of our financial goals should contain. Once we understand that, it's easy to work backwards and then kind of establish the numbers and what those savings goals might be, and then kind of put in an action plan to start to reach those things. What do you think, Gary?
Yeah, the answer really to that is do a plan, do a plan, do a plan. You can just take retirement income because that's such an obvious and goal that most people have at some point. You can take a yellow notepad in 5 minutes based on if you got a good idea of what you think you need monthly income wise. We can figure out pretty quickly about what you need to save for at a particular point, literally on a yellow notepad in 5 minutes. Now, yeah, once we get into a planning system and we do inflation on all that, it's nicer. But you really do need to figure out how much you need for different things. And to Nate's point, you work backwards then to say, okay, if I need this much for this many years, how much money is it going to take to support that lifestyle? But all of that comes back to one thing: do a financial plan. A financial plan will help you. You don't control much. When you do this, as long as I've been doing it, you realize we like to think we control a lot of stuff. We don't control a whole lot. But what we can control is doing a plan, what we save, what we invest, what we spend. And that's really what a plan does. It gets you back to focusing on the things that you can control. So I think we may have already addressed this next question, Nate, on how to successfully navigate investing during the current climate. Again, Nate mentioned it, I mentioned it. you get a plan and you use the plan, you don't let your emotions drag you around. Nate, you may have something more to say on that.
Yeah, I think that's the most important takeaway is plan. There's a saying that goes, failing to plan is planning to fail. Whatever we do in life, we're going to go landscape the backyard, if we're going to take a road trip, we're going to go in and start a new business. Even if it's mental in your head, you create a plan of action. What am I going to do? How am I going to get there? Well, our financial health and laying those things out, thinking about all the details will really help to set you on the right path. And the order goes goals, plan, portfolio, in that order specifically. And you don't see current events anywhere in those three items. And that's for a really good reason. Like Gary said, we don't have control over those things. And control what we can control. That's ultimately what's going to determine our success. Like I said, the dominant determinant of our success financially is going to be our own behavior. And if we're seeking permanent solutions in the short term based on things we can't control for temporary situations, that just throws our plan out the window, really.
I'll tell you how old this question is. Benjamin Graham, some of you may have heard of Benjamin Graham, but he was Warren Buffett's professor in college. And he wrote a book that's a classic investing economics type of book called The Intelligent Investor. If you've never read it and you're interested in that kind of stuff, I'd highly recommend reading The Intelligent Investor. But even Benjamin Graham, as astute as he was financially, knew numbers inside out, knew how to evaluate balance sheets, companies, all that kind of stuff. He said in that book that some people are not meant to be good investors. And his point he hearkened to was, it was not intelligence that made you a good investor. It was not all these other factors we tend to dwell on. It was your emotional makeup. Can you make a plan and stick with the plan? Can you not want to jump out of the airplane just because we've had an engine light come on when everybody else is jumping out? So your emotional makeup and having that plan in place to help you stick with it, with your investing goals is really critical, way more critical than picking the next best mutual fund or the next best stock or all this other stuff that we tend to think of sometimes. So I fully agree with what Nate said, but this is a question that's been around for a long time. So.
I think that's all the questions we had submitted earlier.
We got one more. Nate, we got one more. It was a late one that came in.
All right.
If I should retire, or when I retire, should I retire mortgage debt by utilizing retirement savings? That could be a different answer for every person depending on their situation, maybe. But in general, and again, remember here, I'm saying in general, no. Here's why. Yeah, I'll take you myself for an example. My mortgage right now that we redid, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 years ago now, is at 3.5%. If I pulled out money out of my retirement funds to pay off that mortgage, what happens to my tax return that year? All that income hits my tax return. And I can tell you, my tax rate's a lot higher than 3.5%. And most of yours is going to be much higher than 3.5%. So in general, is it a good idea to use retirement funds to pay off a mortgage? I would say no. I do like the fact that if you're getting ready to retire, though, you do have the funds somewhere to pay it off if you had to. But the issue becomes taking it all out at one time. If you want to do that, what I would say is parcel it out over a period of 2, 3, 4, 5 years where you don't take such a tax hit every year if you can avoid it. That's again, get back to planning. That's something that we could help you with. We could work with your CPA if we needed to help you with that, just to see, okay, how much could I really afford to pull out every year to put toward a mortgage and not really get hammered from a tax perspective. So.
And I think I also consider, number one, you can't ever go wrong by paying off debt. That's good. It helps to create that contentment. But if you need to access that money in the future to live off of, you might have to start to tap into the equity in your home again. And that might involve going back into debt or different strategies too. The other thing about taking it from your investment portfolio is we're thinking about longevity here. So eliminating that mortgage payment can improve your cash flow because you're not paying on that mortgage anymore. You're saving that payment. But prices tend to increase over time. I think we can all think back to buying a candy bar when we were, 8 years old, and comparing the price to that, what we see today, and the difference in those things. So the natural rise in prices is real and is especially significant in things like healthcare that we want to make sure we plan for. And so we want to just consider both of them. Now, it probably makes more sense as you're closer to retirement to pull money out of retirement assets to help pay off the mortgage, rather than somebody who's still 15 or 20 years away. But I agree with Gary, the answer totally depends on your unique circumstances in that situation. And back to the planning piece, we can sit down and do a plan together and weigh out the two different scenarios, and really can't predict the future, but we can model at least which might be more advantageous for you. So I think it's really just working through the specific details together.
Okay, I don't have any appointments this afternoon, so you guys are it for me. I'll stay here as long as you need. If you have more questions, I don't know, Nate, are you free or you need to?
I do. I have actually a financial plan presentation with some clients who are in their mid-30s who want to travel full-time in the next 7 years. So this is a presentation I'm really looking forward to with these clients. So I'm going to have to take off, but please feel free to call or email myself or Gary or any of your advisors. And also, if you know any of your family or friends or colleagues from work that might want to talk about some of these things or have a discussion, we never charge for meetings or phone calls. And I think we're all really consider ourselves servants to help people in their financial journey. So let me know if I can help at all. And I'll leave you with my mantra, my personal mantra today, which is slow down, be present, and spread love.
All right, thank you so much for being on the webinar with us today. Really enjoyed it, and I hope you guys have a great weekend.